Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up. My name is Morgan McLintic, and today we're going to be talking about marketing's impact on overall business leadership. As marketers, it's very easy for us to get pulled into the day-to-day sort of tactical operations of marketing. So today we thought we'd take a step back and think about how marketing impacts various milestones in a startup's lifespan. So we'll be talking about fundraising, the launch of a product, scaling and hiring new staff, building out the partnership program, and also maybe thinking about exit too. And to do that, we'll be joined by Juliana Pereira, who is a fractional CMO and has been involved in a number of startups, helping with raise Series B all the way through to a $500 million exit for one of the companies where she led marketing. So we thought she would be the perfect person to talk to about how marketing can impact the overall business leadership of a startup. So please join me in welcoming Juliana to Fired Up. Juliana, hi. Great to see you. Welcome to Fired Up.
Thanks. Thanks so much for having me, Morgan. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you too. We are going to be talking today about marketing's role in running a business, which I think is important. And so I thought for a framing for our discussion, we'd sort of go through the life cycle of a business and the particular touch points where marketing can really have a major impact. So at the beginning of that, if I'm a tech entrepreneur and I've just founded my business, we've got our sort of MVP, when's the best time to make my first marketing hire?
I love this question because it's such an important question. And I've thought about this a lot over the years. And a lot of companies actually struggle figuring out when they should. So I find that a lot of early stage startups, they feel like they need a really senior marketing person and they hire a heavy hitter just right out the gate, but it's a little too early. And here's the problem. What they need is a marketing strategy. And so actually I'm seeing this now as a fractional CMO, what they really need is someone to come in and give them a marketing strategy. And then that person might not be the most cost-effective person to execute the strategy. So maybe it's time to find a more junior person and keep a fractional or a consultant on the side to help guide. That is one scenario because I have found that some companies, a marketing person comes in. I had this problem actually at a company I worked at where they needed a marketing person to launch the company, get everything up and running. But after I did that, they just needed an events manager. And I didn't want to keep going to the post office and shipping swag. So, at the end of the day, it was one of those, I think we need to take a step back and maybe that's a better situation, which is totally fine and makes sense. And so I've actually spoken to other people in the industry and they've seen the exact same thing. However, it really depends also on how much the company is willing to invest in the go-to-market. So I worked at a company called Flow Commerce. I was there for about 4 years. After 3.5 years, we were acquired for $500 million. I came in super early, post-Series A, really fun ride, very fast. It was really exciting being part of that. But when I was hired, there was no one else on the funnel. It was the CEO and I running the go-to-market. So it was just trying to figure everything out. And so having a senior person made sense because they needed someone to help put everything in place. And also being VC backed, they had money that they really felt committed. The two co-founders are so committed to saying, we want to give you what you need to be successful. We'll be judicious, but we want marketing. We understand that marketing is important here. That was really great. That was post-Series A. It was early on, but they were really committed to that. And so they knew they wanted to do that. Whereas I gave an example of another company where they weren't quite there. They were still figuring things out. And it would have behooved them to have had a more junior person once they had the strategy. Yeah.
Well, I want this sort of mythical person who's going to help with sort of setting the strategy, but also sort of roll up their sleeves and actually execute it. And maybe they've hired someone out of a bigger company who's used to a whole team. And really, you want that best-in-class strategy, but you're paying a lot for that senior person to then, as you just said, take the swag to the post office. And that's not effective, even if you want to do it.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not opposed to getting my hands dirty. I'm working with a client right now. I'm literally mapping individual data fields in the database with our ops person who's fantastic. And that's totally fine. It was more like, should I really be spending half an hour going to the post office? Should I really be going after electric supplies for an event? It was that kind of thing where it was like, why don't we have someone who can do this since this is the majority of the strategy now? So there's getting your hands dirty, and then there's just not able to move forward because you're just stuck in the weeds. So, yeah.
Yeah. And how do you think that now companies can be founded by fewer people, right? A smaller team because you can code with AI and you're trying to be lean and you can get to your first million with a smaller team. Does that mean that marketing has a more important role to play because there's more companies, right? There's more competition because it's cheaper? Or does it mean the opposite? Marketing is more important.
It's hard to answer that because there's so many kind of
Okay.
if the company is like this, if it's like that. And also, so I would just say more broadly with AI, it allows you to do more with less. Absolutely. But I don't see it as like a full replacement for teams and everything, at least not now. I mean, who knows in the future? Everything's changing all the time, but it's transforming marketing for sure. No matter the level of the marketer, you have to be really comfortable using the AI tools to do more with less. That's really important. So marketing is, I think, equally important. It's just the channels through which, or rather the tools that you leverage are obviously changing and shifting. And you have to really stay on top of that. And it's hard because there's a lot out there. There's a lot of AI for the sake of AI. And then there's the real tools. So trying to sort through that can be tricky.
I just have this sense that, hey, they need less VC funding because they can get to revenue faster. And actually, conversely, that makes the marketing more important because they've got to stand out and get there. So in those early days, perhaps they bring in a fractional CMO and then sort of hire a more junior team. But what role is marketing playing at the business level?
Building off of my last comment, I think it depends on the growth trajectory of the company and those expectations. So if the LT, like the leadership team, is really committed to the go to market and driving for growth, then yes, marketing plays a very key role as a business driver and as a business leader. Because there's a very big difference between being a functional leader and a business leader. And so marketing as a business leader would be important in that case. But if the leadership team doesn't have, or the board isn't mandating as aggressive growth goals, or they're more overly conservative with their investment in GTM, like the go to market, and if the industry, for example, also does not have rapid growth, because there are industries that are just not growing as quickly, like e-commerce, flow commerce had the wonderful tailwind of being in the cross-border e-commerce space at a time in the pandemic when everyone was shopping online. It doesn't get better than that, right? Like, I'm not going to deny the fact that I might have done a great job contributing. We did a great job as a team, but that certainly helped enormously. But some other industries don't have those tailwinds. So I think in that case, maybe marketing is more of an ancillary role or really more demand gen focused role on the sales funnel and maybe not as much as the business leader.
I sometimes hear sort of, if you build it, they will come. We've got an open source product or with sort of PLG and people can sort of just drop in and use it. In the modern day, is that even true? What would you say to that?
I think it's wishful thinking, but it depends. I mean, as I start every answer with it depends, but it depends on how broad the appeal is, right? If it's like, a Spotify or Amazon, like, well, at this point, they're all so big. I don't know in the beginning how it was, but, if it has a really broad appeal that especially consumer brands, consumer targeted brands, as opposed to B2B, then yeah, maybe there is a bit of that and you can get away with a lot of things in product led growth. And there's a lot of tactics that still require marketing. I come from more of a B2B background at this point. So I'm very big on targeting and what they call account based marketing, which really is just marketing. It's just targeted marketing. And I see it like this. You build a house. Now you want to have a housewarming party. Do you just go out on the street and grab a bunch of randoms and invite them in? I mean, unless it's like some sort of fundraiser or an open house and you're looking to sell the
Yeah.
house, like I don't know any hosts that have just randomly gone out and brought in some
Let's have a
people that
party. Yes.
yeah, it's just, hey, you want to come in? I don't know you. You could be crazy person. So I kind of see it that way, that it's like you want to invite the people to your home and maybe other people want to come, but you want the qualified leads at the end of the day, right?
Yes. To our point about AI building tools quickly, you're going to lose if your competitor's got an equivalent product, but better marketing. You've got to invest in the brand. We're seeing this is the year of the brand. And again, because we're seeing conversions go down on gated assets on landing pages, organic traffic go down, etc. So you got to invest in your brand. And in those early days, I think that's something that it's easy to skip, but marketing can really bring to the table. Let's talk about product development. We've talked about, okay, I founded my company. I'm bringing in I bring in a fractional CMO, sort of set the strategy, sort of start executing. Marketing is important. What role does marketing play in that sort of product development?
That's such a great dynamic is between marketing and product. And if you have those two people getting along and working well together, it can just be just dynamite. I think marketing should inform the product roadmap. They do not drive it. That is obviously a product and IT thing. But here's the thing. Marketing sits at the confluence of understanding the broader market dynamics, the target audience, prospects, and customers, right? Now, product understands customers and they probably they do hear a lot of prospect calls, fine, but they're not as much in the front of the funnel to see the whole landscape. Like I actually I talk about marketing as if we're the tugboat in front of the ship. Like we might not be directing the ship, but we're the first ones that go into the mist and into the rain and we see what's coming, and so like I see it that way. So we have a really interesting visibility that I think can inform what product is doing. So I think product, they need to be, and I think they are just by the nature of the role, like really good listeners. And if they can also listen to marketing, then that really helps in terms of trying to incorporate their feedback. And maybe it's not something that can happen in the immediate roadmap, but maybe it's also something where they say, okay, we need to respond to this. Let's think about how this is actually, they can validate. Let's put it that way. It's like taking a thesis and say, okay, so what if we were to do this with the product? What would our customers say? They can play around a little bit to validate it.
I like that thinking. And I totally agree because we tend to find, say you've got a SaaS tool, we've moved away from sort of classic big product releases. Here's version 1, 2, 3, even though you might have sort of dot releases. But they tend to be a sort of grab bag of different features that, we've done this, this, and this. And I think from a marketing perspective, unless marketing sort of involved early, they're not thematic. And so how do you pull all those things together so that you can go, this is our usability release, or this is our scaling release, or whatever the theme is? Because otherwise it's sort of, well, we made this little change to the UI here, and then there's this for these people who need this feature. And it's not a cohesive story. So how do you market that? And I think if marketing can kind of get involved with it there early, you can pull those pieces together and maybe sequence them a little bit more.
When you have an ICP, right, the ideal customer profile, and you are defining all of that, one of the tenets that I have for that is, can you reach these people? Are you actually able to reach these people? Because that is a question you need to ask. And can you do it within your budget? So sometimes marketing, knowing that and looking for that, will have to go to product and say, I'm sorry, you're going to have to build this integration to this platform. Like that is who we can reach. And those are the people that we can attract the easiest, and that we actually have a sales cycle that's contracted compared to longer sales cycle, shorter sales cycle, whatnot. There's things like that. Marketing can always see things a little bit in a different way than product.
I think that's really important because there are some ICPs who, they would buy the product, but they're extremely hard to reach, or it's expensive, or there's just not enough of them at scale for you to advertise to, let's say if it's paid media. We just can't, or it's over competitive. I don't know. If you're in the productivity space, let's say, hey, I'm competing against Asana on Monday and all those guys. You as a tiny startup are not going to be able to pay $40 a click to attract those buyers because they can monetize them over years with lots of products, and you've got your little thing. That's just not a viable market for you, just to use that as an example.
In SaaS, at least in B2B, long sales cycles are real. You can be in a sales cycle for 2 years. So yeah, maybe you can even reach those people, but there's nothing you can do to close that deal. Where are you getting your budget for next year? If it's going to be a 3-year deal, great. It might turn into $5 million, but can you last that long? So that's where you have to. And I worked at a company where they were just $1 billion in revenue companies or more. That is the floor. And I was advocating for 150, 200,000 or 200 million, sorry, because we were noticing even with those big companies, they were longer sales cycles, but the ACV wasn't that much bigger. It was maybe twice the size of a smaller company that was a quarter of the size or smaller, a fifth of the size. The math doesn't add up and the effort as well. So that was a problem. And that was a really big point of friction, was that the go-to-market team kept saying, we need to go lower in the market. They're easier to reach. But the co-founders felt very strongly they just wanted billion-dollar businesses because of the cachet.
Totally a tension there in terms of sort of building up. We'd love to have these enterprise sales, but we've got to go through the mid-market because otherwise we could close those deals and we'll run out of budget,
Exactly.
We'll bleed to death waiting, particularly you classically in government, right? You can bleed to death before you've even closed it. I like that example. And it relates to my next question here. We sort of touched a bit about brand.
Yeah.
And I always feel like when you're a marketer, I'm sitting there, I can spend on building my brand or I can spend on demand generation activities today that are going to fill the pipeline in the next quarter. But, building a brand and awareness and reputation is an investment for the future. You've got to balance those two things out. And what's your sort of ethos when it comes to that balance?
That's exactly the first word that came into my head was balance. Again, I'm starting with it depends. But
Yes.
Here in B2B, because I come from venture-backed, or at least in the past 10 years of my career, I come from the venture-backed companies. And more recently, interestingly, as a consultant, I've been consulting more for portfolio companies of private equity firms, which is slightly different and very interesting. And it's not a surprise that they bring in consultants, actually, because they're more judicious with spend. They're very nervous and overly conservative with spend from what I can see so far. Maybe it's not always true, but they're razor focused on tangible results. So they do tend to be more careful. So they would rather bring someone in temporarily and then scale, have that flexibility is my sense. But coming from the VC world in smaller companies, I do skew more to demand generation. I'm full stack. I love brand. It is so important. Like you said, it's long term. But when you're really strapped to try and hit those numbers, especially when you're early on and there's the math on this, the 3x, 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 2x, 2x, right? To hit the $100 million mark and to hit that really quickly, the demand generation piece is really important. But the way I see it is that the brand has to serve your position in the market. Obviously, that makes sense. But what that means to me is you can outgrow your brand. And so at some point, you have to make that decision where you decide or realize that it's holding you back. A great example was at Flow, where I know I talk about it a lot just because everything lined up really well there. So I arrived, everyone said, we have to rebrand this company. There's so many things wrong with it. But we had to get the engine going. We had a lot we needed to put in place in the go-to-market. And we all knew this had to be done. And then finally, it got to a point, a breaking point where we were becoming so established in the market, as two of the competitors told me, we were showing up in every RFP. And it's like, how did the little guys suddenly know about this? Why are they getting invited? Because we did a great job with demand gen. So we were getting to the table, but then we were finding at the table, people are like, oh, but you're kind of scrappy. And, so we did a full rebrand, everything except the name of the company, but really messaging, positioning, the look, the feel, the logos, everything, and really elevated the brand. And we did it so quickly and very quietly. And we came out the gates blazing and just blindsided our competitors. And the reason we actually launched early was the CEO wanted me to launch it a month early. I was able to do it 2 weeks, but was that we were in an RFP with a partner that was really key. And that actually accelerated the acquisition because we came out looking very elevated, and it instills a lot of confidence when you see a brand that's okay. They're not just talking the talk, but we're now seeing like they really are elevated and know what they're talking about. And they have the right positioning as an enterprise solution, which is where we wanted to be, was enterprise, not just SMB.
How did you know when to sort of switch to that that brand exercise? Because I feel like it's a classic trope of new CMO comes in, we're going to change the name of the company, we're going to have a new website, I'm going to last 12 months and then I'm gone and I'm doing exactly the same playbook somewhere else. And the brand, particularly like the visual identity, it's rarely the problem. It's an obvious change. Often the problem is the proposition and other go-to-market things. Like in this instance, it was the problem and you decided to do it quickly and at the right time. But how did you know that was the right time to do it rather than a year before?
There were a number of things that played into that, obviously, as it does, because it is an investment. I slowly carved out some money throughout the year, putting it away in my piggy bank for the branding.
Right. And of time, right? Like, whilst I'm doing the rebrand, I'm not doing my demand gen stuff, right? For the team. Like, we're all distracted on this thing.
And luckily, I actually come from a nonprofit background. That was my first job, 7 years at a nonprofit. I did a lot with no budget. So I think that was part of the reason the CEO hired me. He was like, "You're hired. You're not going to overspend." But really showing the value is really hard of a full rebrand like that. But there were actually some very practical problems where one of them, I actually wrote a LinkedIn Pulse article about this, where I talk about the rebrand and why we had to change it. And one of the things is that the Flow name was so thin, the font, you couldn't see it on signage at events. Next to our competitors, you couldn't see it. It seems so basic. It's, let's just change the font. While we're at it. So that was kind of like, while we're at it, why don't we also revisit this? Also, I'll be honest, it's so funny. I did a presentation to the company where I showed all of the different logos throughout the history of the company that they did. And the one we landed on, the old one, was actually drawn on a napkin by the CEO. And I was like, look, we loved it and we were all attached to it. But it was like, it's time. Like now we need to find something new. Also, the word flow in that case, like it was about flowing cross-border. Totally great. The problem is that forced us, because it was a blue logo, to use a lot of water. And so we were suddenly talking about a lot of water. And it was like, we're also crossing land. It can't just be about water. So we had to find something bigger. So that was the point we were getting to, is that we were getting stuck with our demand gen.
It was actually earthing in demand gen, where you're coming second. We don't know who you are. Or we've mispositioned you. And so it was a number of different sort of data points rather than just a sort of, I'm bored of this. And so I'm going to change it up because we've changed.
Very against coming into a company and doing a rebrand out the gate. There's usually a lot more below the surface that needs to be fixed first.
100%. So you've been involved in a lot of VC-backed startups, and obviously you have to raise funding for that. And I'm interested in marketing's role within that sort of fundraising process. Talk to me a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. At Flow, I was really involved in the Series B. And I mean, we were buttoned up. We had a war room. Everyone on leadership was involved. We had very specific roles and responsibilities, and we're very aligned in how we were talking about the company and our growth and everything. So everything that I put together, I had the rest of the leadership team reviewing and looking at as well and being very familiar with it. So that was really well coordinated. And here's the thing, investors, they want to meet the go-to-market team. They need to know you have competent people in the people who are driving the business. I mean, this seems incredibly obvious, right? But I will tell you, I worked at another company where the co-founders mentioned they wanted to raise a round. And I said, great, let's open the war room. I'm going to start working on my deck. I'll talk to the head of sales and all that. And the CEO looked at me so surprised and said, why would they ever want to meet with you? And so I just let it hang because I wasn't going to argue. I was like, okay, I'll let that just hang right there. A week later, I get a call at 8 p.m. saying the investors want to meet with you and the head of sales tomorrow. I was grilled for 2 hours, the head of sales for, I think, 2 hours as well. And luckily, I had a deck I put together because I anticipated that was going to happen. But we weren't aligned in how we were talking about things. So, it's like the marketer is going to get involved and the salesperson is going to get involved. Like the investors need to know that there's a plan. And the CEO doesn't always have that depth of knowledge to be able to answer about the specifics in the sales motion or the sales and marketing motion, right? Because they're seeing a bigger picture. So yeah, I would say it's really important.
Yeah, because you've got to all be aligned on what we're trying to build here and what the opportunity is and how we're going to get at it. And that's sales, that's marketing. You've got to at least sort of prep up on all of that. So as a CMO, you're going to be heavily involved in that, and maybe not on the initial sort of revs with the VCs, but certainly during the DD. And so make sure you're aligned. And we're now in our business. We've got the funding. That's great. You did a good job at your last company on that. And then what is the role, would you say, as we scale, of marketing when it comes to hiring and the whole employee experience? Because I feel like at times that's a real gating factor for the growth of the company. So what role does marketing have to play there?
Yeah, I see marketing definitely when you're heavy on the demand gen, they're obviously supporting the funnel. But marketing really should be, if they are a business leader, they should be across the entire company and be able to collaborate across the entire company. So I love working with HR to talk about how our internal comms, is marketing sending a weekly newsletter with updates? Like, how are they communicating, about the plans? Running rewards programs, like if employees are referring people or they do something special, like maybe marketing can get involved. Swag as well. Marketing is buying some cool stuff for events. Why wouldn't you want to give that to employees and coordinate with HR, right? And I'm working on that right now with one of the companies I consult for, where we're talking about there's definitely swag for events, but we also want to put together a nice box for new employees, a welcome box. And so marketing should help with that. And also signage in offices. That sounds like a tiny thing, but that's a big part of it as well, as what does that feel like for employees that go to an office. So that's a big thing. I would also say another example where marketing can also impact the employee experience, like tech. I love working with tech teams. They get so excited about what they're building. And I love that excitement because that's really like the heart of it, right? Especially, at a SaaS company. And sometimes they want their own blog and they want to show off the cool stuff they're doing because they want to attract the best talent. That is so important to them. And having a blog where they can nerd out about the cool stuff they just built and all this and how they're using AI is so great. And so I've consulted internally which blog you should set up, how often should you post. And sometimes you have these fantastic developers, English might not be their first language. And so they need help writing. So they'll give me like a short copy and I'll flesh it out and help them post on social as well. And so I think that's really nice. That impacts the employee experience by helping them show off about what they're good at and their strengths. And I think that's really nice.
You're talking about their own like Medium blog, or you're talking about a technical blog for the site, or maybe both?
Mainly, I get involved with the writing more if it's a tech blog, but it's like company.blog. Whatever, or whatever it might be, that they want to have their own blog as a team. But also for posting on social media, right? Helping them have the tools they need to also have their thought leadership or say, hey, maybe you want to post about that. There's like different ways you can work with the employees if they're excited about that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, massive, and particularly if you're posting corporately, you want to make sure that your team is liking and sharing and commenting and quickly, because the algorithm likes that engagement. So
one of the companies I worked at, we would do like competition. I think we would reward employees who posted the most, or like the most, posted the most. Like we'd keep track every month, and like stuff like that can like make it fun. Yeah.
I like the fact that you mentioned walking into the office, the feel of the brand. You can tell as soon as you step in the door. And that is part of marketing. It's all marketing when it comes to that viewpoint. So you need that broad viewpoint. Another critical part of my company's growth here is we've got a great proposition. Now I'm building out my partner ecosystem. Talk to me a little bit about how marketing sort of feeds into that, maybe even leads that exercise.
I've led partnerships before. I love it. I think it's so great. Co-marketing is one of my favorite things. I'm building out a co-marketing program right now with a client, and it's so cool because it's a flywheel. As I like to say, we can make money while we sleep. Why wouldn't you want to invest in that, right? That's fantastic. When done right, it's really can be wonderful. I love partners, shared audiences. You have shared customers, you do events, you get a broader audience from that. You can go to events together, joint webinars. You just have another channel of just new content that you can build, that you can use for demand generation as well. You can do joint press releases with them. I mean, there's just so much that you can build there that's in parallel to your other kind of direct demand gen. but I think is just so important. And then with channel partners, it's a whole other area that you could build out into with sales enablement and everything. You could even go into white labeling your products. And then that's a whole other business line that can be amazing. So I really love the possibilities with channels. And I think marketing doesn't necessarily need to drive it. If you have a really strong partner manager or head of partnerships to really deal with the strategic partners and those big things, I have a framework for how a partner strategy could play out. And so usually having someone who handles those strategic partnerships and relationships, and then having marketing support what are those activities that can engage and to drive referrals, to drive bigger partnerships for, like I mentioned, a white label business or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. A huge exercise and obviously some specialist knowledge and experience in there. So my business is growing. We've done the product. We've got my partners now. And now we're looking at some kind of liquidity event, M&A, IPO. Maybe IPOs will be back this year. Who knows? This is obviously a huge area for marketing, I feel. And you've done this. Tell us a little bit about your experience here.
Yeah. That acquisition of Flow Commerce by Global E, so it was actually the biggest competitor of Flow Commerce, which was really great. I wasn't as involved as the Series B. It moved super fast, and there were a lot of dynamics happening because there was a partner RFP. I think I mentioned this before when I was talking about brand, but there was some conversations happening, and that also accelerated the acquisition by this other company coming in.
You got the partnership and they needed it, right? Okay.
Yes, there was a lot of benefits bringing the three together or the two together to tie in that partnership. That was really terrific. But I think I mentioned before with the rebrand, that was part of that RFP. The CEO wanted that live early because they were in conversation and he was like, I'm liking how the brand is looking. Can we get this up? Because I feel like we need to really show the position in the market. Of course, 6 months later, we were acquired. So all that work sort of flew out the window. But no, I mean, it was totally worth it for that. And marketing should get very involved, I think. So in terms of a joint press release, if there's a event or something for all of that, there's a lot of things. Like I mentioned, it moved so fast, we weren't able to do like a huge, big thing. But yeah, like certainly if I were to do this again, I would want to be like really involved in the talks to make sure that would play out.
But your sense is here, stepping up on the brand and looking put together there, it helped with the valuation. The investment there sort of paid off in the sort of valuation of the overall deal. And then they made the acquisition. And I don't know, in this instance, I know there's different approaches. Did the acquiring brand sort of, what happened to the Flow brand? Did it get subsumed under Global E or did
it
did. So it just sort of, we made this acquisition and we're sunsetting this brand and transitioning the products and the people across. And that was the approach that they took.
What's funny is some of the SEO I did on the site is still doing very well. And so if you Google certain terms, the Flow page still shows up that you go to and it redirects. So I don't know how my SEO is still doing that and getting up on Google, but that's great. So you can find some pages like that, but really it's stripped on the Global E. Like the page might look like the old Flow site a little bit, but it is a Global E branded page. I do not want to take credit for saying that the rebrand directly affected the valuation. I want to be very clear, but I do think that the rebrand did play into helping to elevate the brand for it to be taken more seriously or at least considered as a very viable and successful acquisition and asset. At least I'd like to think so.
Got it. It's funny you mentioned that SEO thing. I've had a client, they were a company called Avi Networks. They were acquired by VMware and they kept the brand around for 5 years after the acquisition, literally because we built up so much SEO. They didn't want to lose all that value. In many ways, it was appearing above the VMware brand, which was great. Like, it's interesting that you had the same experience there. Marketing touches a number of critical parts in the company's sort of life cycle. And if I'm thinking about the sort of org structure, obviously the CMO is part of the leadership team, but where should marketing report in?
Here we go again. It depends on the size of the company, I think, but it's strategic. So is marketing a business leader? What is marketing's purview? Is marketing going to be beyond the funnel and also helping make decisions. Brand is a much bigger thing than just demand gen, like we've talked about. That impacts a lot of different areas. Is it impacting product? Is it giving that? Is it involved in broader comms that are investor relations as well? I've done that in the past. There's a lot of other things that fall outside of the funnel that play into driving sales, but aren't necessarily just focused on it. So if the CEO or the co-founders feel that marketing should have that purview and really drive all of that, then great. CMO report into the CEO. Perfect. If marketing is razor focused on demand generation, and that is the focus, and that's going to be the focus for a very long time, not just like I walked into Flow, I started with demand gen because I just didn't have time to do anything else at that time. But we knew over time we were going to expand. So actually overnight, practically within a year, I went from just me as an employee to 12 people. And then we were going to 20. And it was very quick, super fast. So you need someone who's in a pretty senior role to be able to handle that pretty quickly. So unless you have that, I would just say if you know that this person's going to just focus on the funnel, then it makes sense reporting into a CRO if they're really strong and they're already in seat. It's really that strategic thing, like how big should marketing's purview be in service to the business goals?
That's a good framing. As I'm thinking about, okay, marketing's role in my startup, where it can help, where it can't, what other sort of final advice might you have for startups out there?
Just being so thoughtful about who you hire on your leadership team, especially early. I think so, that investors don't love seeing a lot of churn on the leadership teams of their portfolio companies. It does not speak well to the companies. So you do want to be very cautious about that. You change someone on the team, the dynamic changes and you're back to square one trying to work together again. It's a lot driven by cultural fit in the beginning, especially as that's in the forming stage. So I think it's really being thoughtful of not only do we need a CMO now, but are we going to need them in 6 months? Are we going to need them in 9 months? Or do we just need someone who can execute right now, get a consultant in, what have you, and then think about this after the Series B. I'm so happy that I came into Flow after the Series A. It was an incredible experience. But again, it was very much the commitment from the leadership team for the marketing. So I think that's the thing. If you're going to commit to getting a marketer, you have to give them budget. I was in a role as a CMO where I was given a budget for marketing programs, something like $400,000 or $600,000 after you removed headcount. I was like, I don't even know what to do. That's so hard. Like our PR budget was like almost $100,000 that year because we had a PR person. It was just, so you got to commit. Otherwise you can't do anything.
Yeah, be thoughtful about the timing and the seniority. And to be clear, you came into Flow when they were a Series A and you helped with the Series B, but they knew that they were going to ramp pretty quickly. But if you are a Series A company and you're still sort of finding your fit a little bit there and scale, maybe you don't need that senior role and maybe you wait to the B or even later to get that senior marketer because you've got to have the funds to, like you just said, to warrant it. It's got to be a strategic part of the business.
Yeah, that's exactly right. For sure. And it takes a lot of alignment.
No, I just like to frame it in terms of, okay, if I'm A or B, I think that helps give some sort of way markers to companies out there. Great. Thanks for that. Juliana, if people want to get in touch with you, where should they go?
So I am on LinkedIn, like everyone else. That is the main place. I do have an email. It's a little long, but Juliana with one N at jpereiraconsulting.com. I haven't built my website yet. It's only been a few months since I started, so I'm still working on that.
Wow. Well, that's great. Busy marketing everybody else. Totally get that. Juliana, thanks for your time today. Really enjoyed talking to you, and we look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.